Hi, I'm George Gerbo, and welcome to Washington Times Weekly, where we get a chance to sit down with our reporters and talk about their coverage of the latest news and events. And joining me today, once again, is talented national politics reporter Seth McLaughlin. Seth, it's good to see you.
George, good to see you.
You've got everything covered in terms of the politics world, the things that affect Washington but are going on outside of Washington. And so that's a good starting place for us in Texas, where state Democrats, specifically in the Texas House, had left the state in an attempt to delay proceedings there. The Republicans have moved to redraw the state's congressional district lines, which usually only happens every 10 years after a census, but Republicans are trying to net more seats in advance of what they believe will be a potential tough re-election bid for many House members during the midterms coming up next year. Democrats tried to delay that process the best they could, but it appears they've returned to Texas and that process is going to carry itself out now.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at hard-nosed politics 101. Democrats have kind of portrayed it as a power grab or rigging the system or whatnot, but, when you have majorities in both chambers of a state house, you can make moves like this. And like you said, usually it's done at the end around the census happens and then the districts are redrawn in some way, shape, or form by a state legislature. Different states have different rules. Some use independent commissions. But I think like this story, there's the Texas angle where they are trying to maneuver to get 5 or 6 seats to help buffer their chances of keeping the U.S. House in the midterm elections and allowing the Trump agenda to kind of keep moving forward, with them calling the shots in the lower chamber. But broadly, we're seeing other states jump on board. California and Gavin Newsom, they are pushing now to have their state legislature pass basically a ballot measure that will go to voters this fall. That it's a countermeasure at the end of the day, that they want to pick up 5 seats, maybe more, depending on what the final map looks like, to level out what Texas did. But beyond that, we have efforts in Indiana, Ohio, Missouri, where lawmakers are talking about, these are Republican states, are talking about following the lead of Texas. And then you have people like Newsom encouraging Democratic leaders in places like Illinois, Maryland, and Jersey to do the same. So, it's a sign of the times in a lot of ways, where partisanship rules. And, again, forget about working across the aisle here and there, or at least in this aspect, and try to improve your numbers as much as possible at the end of the day in order to move your priorities here in Washington.
Another sign of the times, it's never too early to start talking about re-election campaigns and election season ahead of those midterms. And some of these battles, Seth, are actually starting to intensify and ramp up in Virginia. It's a state that is term limited. Its governors only can serve 1 term. They can't serve consecutive terms. We'll see what current Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin chooses to do in terms of his political future, whether that's a White House run or not down the line. But in the meantime, for next year's gubernatorial elections in the Old Dominion, former Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger is facing off against current Lieutenant Governor Republican Winsome Earl Sears, and recent polling showing Spanberger's got the advantage there so far. Spanberger is a former CIA agent. She positioned herself as kind of a moderate during her time in Congress, even though the district she represented was fairly a blue district in Northern Virginia, and currently has the upper lead in a state like Virginia that has seen some swings over the years, can go extremely Republican in some seasons, and then it can go toward the Democrats in others.
2 quick things here. I mean, I was looking yesterday, and early voting starts in Virginia in a month. So, you typically in politics, you frame things as like the post-Labor Day sprint and whatnot, but, it's actually happening right now. And the polling up until this point has showed Spanberger leading the Lieutenant Governor, Winsome Earl Sears, but that gap had closed in the latest poll. And Spanberger, like you said, she's sort of carving out that middle lane, trying to energize the ground troops, the liberal ground troops, but also not scare away others. And the interesting thing, Virginia always is a bellwether in the off-year elections. People look to it, Virginia and New Jersey, look to it for some signs of how the public feels about the sitting president and the folks in Congress. And in this instance, Virginia might really tell us something, because Spanberger and Democrats are trying to make the most of what the Trump administration has done vis-a-vis scaling back the federal workforce and just reducing the size and scope overall of the federal government. And out of all the states in the nation, Virginia is one of the ones that gets hit hardest by that. Has a lot of federal employees, has a lot of companies that do work with the federal government. And so the fallout, the political fallout from that is going to be interesting. And Democrats are trying their damnedest to tap into that. Spanberger just this week highlighted a report from the University of Virginia, which I think the finding was that basically job growth would be neutral. And one of the things they pointed to were the Trump administration's efforts to downsize the government. And then on top of that, some of the kind of uncertainty that goes along with the Trump tariffs and trade and what sort of impact that will have on the economy and the workforce. And, you know, it kind of all trickles down from there. So all eyes are on Virginia. I think it's, you know, again, early voting is about to start.
Mm.
When we turn the Labor Day corner, I think more and more people are going to really, really zero in on it. And that will be, you know, one of those early telltales of where we're headed going into the midterm elections.
And going into that midterm election, some significant Senate races in some bellwether type of states, or in some one's a bellwether, the other's decidedly Republican. We'll start with the bellwether state, Ohio, which has trended Republican in the last couple of elections, more so than its previous bellwether status over the decades would indicate. But Sherrod Brown, former Democratic senator, he is trying again. He would kicked off his reelection campaign as challenging John Husted, who took over J.D. Vance's seat when J.D. Vance was chosen to be President Trump's vice president. Brown's got a good reputation and record in the state, blue collar kind of guy, always defended steel workers, especially in the northeastern part of the state. But it'll be curious to see in a new environment, a post-Trump environment in Ohio, whether that holds. And then you go, Seth, to a place like Texas, where Beto O'Rourke, former Democratic congressman, is going to run again. He decidedly lost to Ted Cruz when he ran a few years ago. Now this time it's going to be against John Cornyn, who's one of the leaders in the Republican Party in the Senate.
I think the way to look at this is, you know, Democrats are looking for opportunities wherever they can get it in the hopes of flipping the Senate in a year in which the map really isn't working in their favor. So Senator Brown probably gives Democrats the best shot they could have of winning a seat in Ohio, which, like you said, was a bellwether, but I will declare right now, George, no longer a bellwether.
No longer.
Because, you know, Senator Brown was the last remaining Democratic statewide official. He lost last year to Bernie Moreno in the Senate race by, I forget what the margin was, but it was he was beat. But it's interesting, 8 months later, you know, in the launch video this week, he was like, I can't stand what's going on. And, you know, Brown's someone who was in the Senate for decades. I think, you know, Ohio, beyond no longer being sort of the bellwether once was, it is, though, still an epicenter for every discussion around the working class, trade agreements, the hollowing out of communities. And, you know, the politics of that has helped turn the state more red. But, you know, someone like Brown has actually always tried to speak to those issues. He voted against NAFTA, and he's been critical of international trade agreements. He did fall in line with President Trump when he rewrote NAFTA with the USMCA. So, you know, Brown, you know, he'll keep right where he is probably in this race, define himself as a working class guy, and probably have to distance himself from the Democratic Party a little bit on some of the cultural issues that resonate in Ohio. Going south to Texas, now Beto O'Rourke, I mean, all of a sudden he's back, baby. And I wasn't sure if Beto was going to be back in the game or what, but the fight over redistricting in Texas has put a spotlight back on him. And, you know, I was talking to a political science professor this week, and I asked, you know, did you think he was always going to run, or was he more of a political junkie kind of hanging around? And the guy said, I think he was a political junkie, but it just happened in this instance that this redistricting debate has kind of played to his strengths. And Beto's strengths are, you know, kind of a no holds barred, take no prisoners, rhetorical approach to the Trump administration. He's arguing Democrats must be on their front foot. They can't wait for Republicans to act. So if, again, going back to the redistricting thing, he's encouraging Democratic leaders across the country to change the maps now. Don't wait for Republicans to do stuff. We need to do it first. That's the only way to stop Trump and the Republican agenda from moving forward. Now he's running against, he has not announced, but he's running, if he does run, he's running against former Rep. Colin Aldred. He was a national football player. He ran for the US Senate before and lost to Ted Cruz. And he is trying to carve out more of a middle lane. I think the idea is that in Texas, it's such a red state, you need Republicans on your side. So they're both kind of interesting test cases. And Beto's going to try, if he runs, he's going to try to rev up the ground troops, and that's where he drives his margin. And then on top of that, he would try to peel off some of those Republicans that might not have a appetite for the leader in the Republican race, Attorney General Ken Paxton, who's running against John Cornyn. And Aldridge, on the other hand, is going to, try to carve out that middle road, try not to scare away Republican voters who also might not have an appetite for Ken Paxton, and sees that as the winning formula. Quickly on the Republican race, Senator Cornyn, staple of Washington politics, staple of Texas politics, has been trailing in the polls to Attorney General Ken Paxton. And it seems like he actually has a lot of work to do there, where his MAGA credentials, or his credentials as a hardcore punch him in the nose conservative, are being challenged by Paxton, who is never hesitant to fight fire with fire, or blowtorch his political opponents and get some joy out of it.
A lot of twists and turns, in both parties and their primaries there in Texas, as well as across the nation, that we'll find out together over the next 14 months or so. We know you'll be on top of it, Seth. Appreciate the time as always.
Yeah, George, thanks, man.
You can find Seth's work online at WashingtonTimes.com, as well as on social media. I'm George Gerbo. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.